You know that feeling when you're pushing a door that says pull? That moment when you realize you've been working against the natural flow of things, making everything harder than it needs to be? That's what most of your exhaustion actually is. It's not that life is impossibly difficult or that you're fundamentally broken. You're just forcing things that were never meant to be forced. See, we live in a culture that worships effort. Grind harder, push through, never give up. But nobody talks about the difference between productive effort and destructive force. Nobody explains that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying so damn hard. Here's what they don't tell you. When you're constantly swimming upstream, you're not just wasting energy. You're actively fighting the current of your own life. Think about the last time you felt truly at ease. Not lazy, not checked out, but genuinely flowing. You weren't forcing conversations. You weren't trying to convince anyone of anything. You weren't pushing yourself into situations that felt wrong. Things just moved naturally. That's not a coincidence. That's alignment. And the exhaustion you feel most days, that's the cost of living out of alignment. Most people spend their entire lives trying to fit square pegs into round holes. They take jobs that drain their soul because they think they should. They stay in relationships that require constant maintenance because they're afraid of being alone. They chase goals that look good on paper but feel empty in practice. And then they wonder why they're tired all the time. But fatigue isn't always about not getting enough sleep or working too many hours. Sometimes it's your body's way of telling you that you're living someone else's life. When you're constantly going against your natural grain, your nervous system stays in a state of low-level stress. You're always slightly on edge, always pushing through resistance that shouldn't be there. Here's the thing about resistance in your life. It's information. When something feels like you're dragging yourself through mud, when every step forward feels like a battle, your intuition is trying to tell you something. Not that you should give up on everything challenging, but that you might be forcing something that isn't meant for you. The people who seem to have endless energy and who make success look effortless are not superhuman. They've just learned to recognize the difference between good resistance and bad resistance. Good resistance is the temporary discomfort of growth, like the burn in your muscles when you're getting stronger. Bad resistance is the chronic exhaustion of fighting your own nature. And your nature isn't something you decide with your mind. It's not a personality test or a career assessment. It's the way energy moves through you when you're not trying to control it. It's what happens when you stop performing and start being. It's the direction you naturally want to go when nobody's watching and nothing's expected of you. But we've been conditioned to ignore these signals. We're taught that wanting comes from weakness, that following your instincts is selfish, that the right path is always the hardest one. So we override our internal compass and then act surprised when we end up lost and exhausted. The truth is, when you're aligned with what's actually meant for you, effort becomes different. It's not the grinding, forcing kind of effort. It's more like the effort of a river flowing downhill. There's power there. There's movement. But it's working with gravity instead of against it. You can feel this in your body. When you're forcing something that isn't right, your shoulders tense up, your jaw clenches, your breathing gets shallow. But when you're moving in the right direction, even if it's challenging, there's an underlying ease. Your body relaxes into the work instead of bracing against it. And here's where it gets interesting. The moment you stop forcing what isn't meant to be, you create space for what is meant to be. It's like finally letting go of that door you've been pushing so you can see the pull sign that was there the whole time. Suddenly, what seemed impossible becomes natural. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. It means you become selective about where you put your energy. You start distinguishing between the things that require temporary effort and the things that require constant force, between the challenges that grow you and the situations that drain you. Most people are afraid to stop forcing because they think everything will fall apart. But what actually happens is that the things that were meant to stay find a way to work themselves out, and the things that were draining your life force naturally fall away. You're not abandoning your responsibilities. You're just stopping trying to control outcomes that were never yours to control. Think about a time when you stopped chasing something you thought you wanted. Maybe it was a relationship that required constant convincing, or a goal that felt more like punishment than progress. What happened in the space that opened up? Something better probably showed up. Something that felt more natural, more aligned with who you actually are. That's not magical thinking. That's how energy works. When you're not constantly bleeding your life force into the wrong places, you have more to give to the right places. When you stop forcing doors that are meant to stay closed, you notice the ones that are already open. But the hardest part isn't recognizing when you're forcing something. The hardest part is trusting yourself enough to stop. Stopping feels like giving up. And we've been taught that giving up is the worst thing you can do. But there's a difference between giving up and letting go. Giving up comes from defeat. Letting go comes from wisdom. Letting go is recognizing that your worth isn't determined by how much you can endure. It's understanding that some battles aren't meant to be won. Some people aren't meant to understand you. And some paths aren't meant to be walked. It's the courage to disappoint others in order to honor yourself. And when you finally stop forcing what isn't meant to be, something shifts. The chronic tension in your body starts to release. Your mind stops racing through endless scenarios of how to make things work. You start sleeping better, laughing easier, breathing deeper, not because your problems disappear, but because you're no longer at war with your own life. You begin to trust that what's meant for you won't require you to become someone else to get it. The right people will appreciate you as you are. The right opportunities will feel exciting rather than overwhelming. The right path will challenge you without breaking you. This is what they mean when they talk about flow state. But it's not just for athletes or artists. It's available in every area of your life. When you stop swimming against the current, when you start paying attention to what feels natural rather than what looks impressive, when you choose ease over struggle, not because you're lazy, but because you're finally listening. The exhaustion you've been carrying isn't proof that life is hard. It's proof that you've been making it harder than it needs to be. And the moment you stop forcing what isn't meant to be, you'll remember what it feels like to be alive instead of just surviving. You'll remember that your energy is precious, that your time is finite, and that you don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting both. You'll realize that the thing you thought was rest was actually resistance, and the thing you thought was effort was actually force. And in that recognition, everything changes, not because you become someone different, but because you finally stop trying to be someone you're not. You stop forcing yourself into spaces that were never meant to hold you. You stop trying to convince people who were never meant to understand you. You become tired in a different way. Tired from doing meaningful work instead of busy work. Tired from growth instead of struggle. Tired from living instead of performing. And that kind of tired, that's the good kind. That's the kind that sleep actually fixes. Because when you're finally moving with the flow of your life instead of against it, rest becomes rest instead of recovery. Recovery from the exhaustion of being someone you're not, in places you don't belong, doing things that don't matter. And when you wake up as yourself, ready to meet the day as who you actually are. That's when you realize you were never actually tired. You were just forcing what was never meant to be forced. And the moment you stop, the moment you let go, the moment you trust the current of your own life, everything you actually need starts flowing toward you naturally. The beauty of learning to trust your inner knowing is that it's already there, waiting, beneath all the noise you've been trained to listen to instead. You don't need to develop some mystical power or master ancient techniques. You just need to remember how to hear what's been whispering to you all along. Think about those moments when you knew something was right or wrong before you could explain why. The job interview where everything looked perfect on paper, but something felt off. The relationship that made logical sense but left you feeling drained. The opportunity that scared you but sparked something alive in your chest. That knowing, that inner compass, it's been guiding you your whole life. You've just been taught to override it with analysis. Here's what happens when you start honoring that inner voice instead of drowning it out with overthinking. You begin to move through life with a different kind of confidence. Not the loud, performative kind that needs to prove itself, but the quiet certainty that comes from being aligned with your truth. You stop second-guessing every decision because you're learning to trust the wisdom that doesn't need a pros and cons list. But let's be real. This isn't always comfortable. Your inner knowing doesn't always tell you what you want to hear. Sometimes it whispers that you need to have that difficult conversation. Sometimes it suggests you're settling for less than you deserve. Sometimes it points toward the scarier path, the one that requires you to bet on yourself when no one else will. The resistance you feel when something is truly meant for you versus when you're forcing it, these sensations are completely different. Meant feels like coming home. It might be challenging. It might stretch you. But there's an underlying rightness to it. Forcing feels like swimming upstream constantly. You can do it for a while, but eventually you'll exhaust yourself fighting against the current. Your body knows the difference, even when your mind doesn't. That tightness in your chest when you're saying yes to something that's a no. The way your shoulders drop when you finally stop pushing against what isn't working. The surge of energy when you align with what's actually calling you. These aren't random sensations. They're information. Most people ignore this information because they've been taught that feelings aren't reliable, that logic should always win. But what if your feelings are actually the most sophisticated guidance system you have? What if that gut instinct is picking up on patterns and possibilities your conscious mind hasn't processed yet? When you start paying attention to these signals, you realize how much energy you've been wasting on things that were never meant for you. The relationships you tried to force into working, the career paths you pursued because they looked good on paper, the goals you chased because someone else told you they were important. All that effort, all that struggle, all that exhaustion from pushing against your own nature. Here's the thing about alignment. It doesn't mean everything becomes effortless. It means your efforts are finally pointed in the right direction. You're working with your natural flow instead of against it. You're swimming with the current instead of fighting it. The challenges that come up feel different because they're challenges that are growing you toward who you're meant to become, not breaking you down into who you're not. This is why some people seem to attract opportunities effortlessly, while others struggle despite working twice as hard. It's not luck, it's alignment. When you're moving in harmony with your authentic nature, you naturally draw in what belongs to you, not because you're forcing it, but because there's a resonance, a match between who you are and what you're creating. The crazy part is how obvious it becomes once you start living this way. You look back at all the times you were forcing, pushing, trying to make something work that clearly wasn't meant to be, and you wonder how you couldn't see it before. The signs were all there. Your body was telling you. Your energy was telling you. Your peace of mind was telling you. You just weren't listening. So maybe the real question isn't how to get what you want. Maybe it's how to want what's actually meant for you. How to align your desires with your deeper knowing, instead of with what you think you should want based on external expectations or old programming. When you stop forcing what's not meant and start flowing with what is, you discover something remarkable. Life becomes less about struggle and more about surrender. Not the kind of surrender that gives up, but the kind that trusts. The kind that says, I'll do my part, I'll show up fully, I'll take the actions that feel aligned, and then I'll let life meet me halfway. That's when the magic happens. When you're no longer exhausted from swimming against the current, you have energy for what actually matters. When you're no longer forcing doors that are meant to stay closed, you notice the ones that are opening naturally. When you're no longer fighting against your own nature, you finally get to see what you're truly capable of. The tiredness you've been carrying isn't from living too little, it's from forcing too much. And the moment you stop, the moment you let yourself rest in what's actually meant for you, you'll remember what it feels like to be truly alive.